Hi there. In this video we're going to talk about principle number 6, which is maintain an iron will through mental toughness. Now the first thing here, let me check my notes here again. The first thing here is mental toughness is geared towards survival, first and foremost, right? And regardless of what's happening to you, you need to continue on through any kind of pain or any kind of blood, right? Now, there's only so many ways you can learn this, right? Well, the first way, which is not recommended, is trial and error during street situations, right? It's not the ideal to learn things. I wouldn't go into street situations just to get mentally tough and develop an iron will. It's not like a great place. The other way, of course, is in a martial arts club through really hard training, right? And there's a lot of clubs out there that train hard and tough, right? The last one that I think is visualization, right? We'll come back to that in a minute, right? Now, as far as the martial arts clubs go, right? Training in a martial arts club that's tough only allows you to have acceptance, not resistance, to pain. And you only end up enduring pain, right? That's all that happens, right? It doesn't matter how tough the club is, it doesn't matter how tough you are, you're never going to be pain free. You're always going to have to accept it and endure it as part of the training. Now, and I'll give you an example of that, right? When I was in jiu-jitsu, when I first started jiu-jitsu, I was 28 year old, and up to that point in my life, I was actually at a good place, right? I felt as if I could defend myself against pretty much anybody. I felt confident, I felt self-assured. I didn't feel I needed any other martial arts training. I felt good. But my brother, of course, at the time, came to me and said to me, "What's jiu-jitsu?" And I said, "Well, I don't really know." I said, "I've only ever done karate and boxing at that point, a wee bit of kung fu." But I said to him, "For what I can gather, it's a kind of mixture between karate and judo, right?" This is what I thought. This is how naive I was. I said, "But I don't really know." He says, "Well, I went to it because I was looking for a kendo club," he said. And he says, I went in and I just watched it. He says, "And I think it's quite good and I think you would like this stuff." And I said, it's not for me." I said, "I'm happy the way I am." So, anyway, as it turned out, I went to it for 4 weeks. And the only reason I done it for 4 weeks is because I was on night shift at the time. And I was doing 16-hour shifts. And I was coming off a 16-hour shift straight onto the mat. Right? And I found it too difficult coming off of the night shift straight on. And so eventually, after about 4 weeks, I told and said to the instructor, I'm done. I'm not coming back until I change my jobs." And he kind of looked at me as if to say, "Yeah, right. Heard it all before." But eventually, as luck would have it, a year later, I found myself without a job. I was unemployed, right? And I thought, well, okay, I'm going to go back to this club. And I went back, and I must admit the training was, to say the least, tough. It was brutal. It was really hard going, and there was a lot of pain involved, a lot of injury involved, and I went all the time, of course, and never missed a session. And as it turned out, eventually one of my friends came up to the house and they seen me all covered in bruises, and they seen me try to struggle to walk and struggle to bend and do stuff because I was always carrying an injury, right, of some description. And he was quite good. He actually said to me, "Why are you doing this stuff? What's the reason?" And I said, "Well, when I seen it, I thought I need to learn this stuff because what they were doing, the techniques they were doing, and how beneficial it would be to me." And he laughed and he said to me, he says, "The only thing that seems to be happening to you is you seem to be getting injured. You seem to be covered in bruises all the time." He says, "And you can hardly move when you're not in the club." And he says, "So you're actually getting more injured in this club than what you would be outside." And I thought, "Oh, you're right." But at the same token, I wanted to learn it because I seen the advantages in what they were teaching. So I endured it, right? It's no, I must admit, had I went to this club, my club that I went to, if I went to that at say 17 or 18, I would have quit it and I would never have went back because it would have been too tough for me. But because I was 28, I realised the benefit of it in spite of the pain, in spite of the injuries, and I continued on until eventually it got to a stage where I had no injuries. I could go. In fact, I got to a stage I was doing 4 sessions a week, and apart from training in the house myself. But anyway, out with that, right? A martial arts club is another way, as I said, through hard training. My club was very difficult. It was a very brutal club. The reason being is because my instructor was an ex-judo fourth dan who was an ex-Scottish champion, right? And he insisted on really hard training. In fact, when I went down to England, and I lived in England for 10 years, I went to 2 different jiu-jitsu clubs in England, and the training, although the syllabus was the same type of training as far as syllabus goes, the actual methods of training were nowhere near as tough, nowhere near as nowhere near as hard, right? And so it kind of done me a favour in that. In our club as well, you might hear people talk about Japanese jiu-jitsu, right, and they'll say, "Oh, it's too much cooperation and that you can't do anything because somebody does something, you do something, But in our club, we had actual sparring, right? We sparred stand up and we sparred groundwork. Right, stand up was kind of kicking and punching. You weren't allowed to throw. You weren't allowed to do any kind of locks. It was just kicking and punching, kind of like kickboxing, right? And the sparring for the groundwork was judo based. It was on your knees, and you just try to submit the other person, right? So that was good. But I never got that in any other jiu-jitsu club, believe it or not. The other 2 jiu-jitsu clubs I went to do in England were they didn't have anything like that. It was just a case of doing the syllabus. So I can see why people would think that way, But sparring's another thing. I'll talk about that some other time. Why I don't believe that sparring is beneficial to self-defense or self-protection. Right? Even though I've done a hell of a lot of it myself, I don't believe it's beneficial. Right? But again, we'll talk about some other time. Now, getting back to visualization was the last one here. That was the main method I used was visualization. Right? Now I know it might seem a bit hocus pocus, new age meditation kind of nonsense, right? But it's not really, if you do it properly and do it fully, you will get benefit of it, right? It's down to you. I found it very, very beneficial. I was doing it since my 20s anyway. I was doing it before I went to jiu-jitsu. I learned it when I was about 20 for other sports, right? And I've used it in several things in my life, and it's really helped me. Because here's the thing, the mind is the most important thing, right? It doesn't matter how many techniques you know. It doesn't matter how tough you think you are. It doesn't matter how fit you are, how young you are. None of that matters to a point, right? What matters is up here, right? This is why, and I've seen this, right? And I'm not being no disrespect to karate, right? I'm not being disrespectful to karate because I've done a lot of karate myself when I was younger. Now, I've seen karate black belts getting their arse handed to them in the street, right? And the reason being is because defending yourself on the street is completely different from fighting or sparring in a dojo, right? Now, you've probably heard this a million times, right? There's a million and one videos out there of people talking like this, right? But that's the thing, it's different, right? The mind is the most important, and what I mean by that is you could be great in a martial arts club, you could be the best fighter in the martial arts club, but the minute a real situation outside is with adrenaline, fear, you know, the realisation that you could actually die, right? That's how different. A lot of people crumble with that. They can be great fighters but crumble up here, right? Now, there's only really one way I know for me. Now, what works for me may not necessarily work for you. So I can only tell you what worked for me, right? I've got two affirmations I used once I became competent, once I knew I was fully formed, if you like, as far as mentally goes, right? My two affirmations were simply this: anytime I was in a real situation, anytime, I always say to myself, I'm going to survive this, right? I'm going to survive this. It doesn't matter what happens, I'm going to survive this, right? And my other affirmation, and this is going to sound a wee bit arrogant, but this is what I've said to myself, was the only way you're going to beat me is to kill me. That's it. If you don't kill me, you're not going to beat me. That's the two things I used to think. You know, and to a point I still think that today, you know. I mean, I don't look for trouble or anything like that. But my attitude is, the only way you're going to beat me is to kill me. I'm sorry, but that's it. That's the only way you're going to beat me. Arrogant as it may sound, or, you know, it doesn't matter what anybody wants to think of it. That's how I personally think, right? Now, the other thing is, and I'll look at my notes again, you've got a conscious mind, right? And you've got a subconscious mind, right? And here's the thing, the subconscious mind can't tell the difference between reality, visualization, or dreaming. And this is why you end up, and you've probably had it yourself, you've woke up for a dream and you think to yourself, thank goodness that was a dream. Glad it was only a dream, right? And that's why that happens. Because your subconscious, without you realising it, you might look at something during the day and in your mind you're not giving it a second thought, right? But that is going into your subconscious and it's storing that, right? And so later on you could dream about that without even realising you'd kind of recognised it during the day, you know. So your subconscious can tell the difference between reality visualization and dreaming, right? So if you can visualize something, now I'm talking about normal things here. I'm not talking about like, I mean, you can't visualize yourself to be a brain surgeon, right? Right, you can't do that. You can't say, well, I'll visualise being a brain surgeon and become a brain surgeon. It's not possible. It's not going to happen. But I'm talking about realistic things here, right? We're talking about self-defence, self-protection here. You need to get this into your mind, right? You need to be determined, and you need. That's the way I trained it. Right, I always trained at visualisation. It was the best way. Like I say, you can get into a club and do it, but the only thing you'll be doing to yourself in a club is enduring pain and enduring hardship. You know, it might toughen you up a wee bit, right? But you're still going to come away with injuries, and you might even question why you're doing it, right? To me, again, I don't understand people's whole attitude towards martial arts. To me, martial arts is about defending yourself, self-protection, right? So you've got the physical side of it and you've got the mental side of it. You could be brilliant in the mental side, but you really need to be good up here as well, right? I don't mean smart as in intelligent. I just mean you need to train yourself to ignore pain, even though you feel it. You need to ignore it. You need to ignore any kind of blood, right? You need to continue on as best you can. You need to be determined to continue on. This is where I say the thing about the only way to beat me is to kill me, because that's about reinforcing determination, right? If you're more determined than somebody, believe me this, right? If I was to pick between three people to watch my back, say one was a black belt in karate, one was a black belt in, I don't know, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? And one had never done martial arts, but he's as tough as nails up here, I'd pick the guy who's tough as nails up here, right? Every time. Why? Because although the other two might have some useful skills, they might be fairly competent, but they might crumble in the street. A bottle might collapse in the street. Adrenaline might be too much for them. Fear might be too much for them. But a guy who's mentally tough, even though he's not got as much skills, will endure. And that's the difference, right? Now, that's my way. I learnt it was through visualisation. I've tried the other methods, you know, but there's plenty of books out there. I'm not an expert. I'm only telling you what I personally have used. Now, if it doesn't work for you, go read a book. Find another YouTube video, right? I'm only telling you what works for me. So, it's up to you whether you accept it or use it. If you don't, you don't. If you think it's rubbish, fine, right? But it works for me, right? It's always worked for me. So, saying that, until next video, goodbye.